In the town of Northwood, a single act of brutality sets off a firestorm no one saw coming. When police officer Calvin Bains assaults Cynthia Adams, a black woman in a wheelchair, in front of her granddaughter, Layla, the horrific moment is captured on camera and spreads like wildfire. As protest anger and public outrage divide the town, Cynthia's daughter Naomi, a disillusioned civil rights attorney, takes up the fight to hold Bains accountable. But as the legal battle intensifies, Bains' life takes an inexplicable turn. His legs become paralyzed, reflecting the very suffering he inflicted. Rumor has it that Cynthia's late husband, a spiritual leader, left behind a curse meant to reveal the truth in those who harm others. As Naomi battles in court, she must also wrestle with a deeper question. Is justice truly served through punishment or through the power to forgive? With each passing day, Bane's transformation forces Naomi to confront not only the broken legal system, but also the legacy of hate that threatens to shape her daughter's future. A moving, compelling story about justice, redemption, and the terrifying weight of our actions, where the lines between punishment and forgiveness blur, and healing can come only from breaking the cycle of hate. In the quiet town of Northwood, one brutal act ignites a firestorm. Officer Calvin Bains, a decorated but deeply prejudiced police officer, violently assaults Cynthia Adams, a black woman in a wheelchair, in front of her 8-year-old granddaughter, Layla. The horrific incident, captured on video, goes viral, stirring nationwide outrage. But when the justice system begins to tip in favor of Bains, protecting him behind layers of excuses, the Adams family faces the familiar ache of betrayal, until something extraordinary happens. Without warning, Bains' life takes a disturbing turn. A mysterious paralysis steals his ability to walk, forcing him into the very position Cynthia once occupied. Stripped of his authority, Bains finds himself mocked, vulnerable, and humiliated, just as Cynthia was. Rumors spread about a strange curse placed by Cynthia's late husband, Samuel Adams, a spiritual leader known for his belief in karmic justice. But the truth behind the curse is more complicated and more terrifying than anyone imagined. At the center of the storm is Naomi Adams, Cynthia's daughter and a disillusioned civil rights lawyer, struggling to balance her fight for justice with her need to protect her daughter Layla from further trauma. Naomi must navigate the blurred lines between justice and revenge, between the law she once believed in and a fate that seems to be meting out punishment far beyond her control. As Bane's life spirals deeper into tragedy, Naomi must confront an agonizing choice. Will she allow fate to take its course, or break the cycle of hate by choosing forgiveness? A story of justice, redemption, and reckoning, Wheels of Justice is a powerful and emotional exploration of what happens when the oppressor becomes the oppressed, and whether true justice is found in punishment or in the choice to forgive. Appearance: 34, tall, with dark brown skin, expressive almond-shaped eyes, and shoulder-length natural hair, usually pulled back in a bun. She wears professional clothes, though exhaustion shows in her eyes. Naomi is a civil rights attorney, emotionally drained from years of fighting a legal system that rarely delivers justice. A single mother to Layla, she distances herself from her late father's spiritual beliefs, trusting in the cold logic of the law, until Baines's attack on her mother forces her to question everything. Her relationship with Cynthia is complicated. She feels both love and frustration at her mother's passive acceptance of injustice. Cynthia Adams' appearance: 58, slender and dignified, with dark brown skin and soft white curls. Confined to a sleek black wheelchair, she dresses in colorful shawls and scarves. A retired teacher, Cynthia carries a quiet strength shaped by a lifetime of microaggressions and systemic discrimination. She was married to Samuel Adams, a spiritual leader in the Black community whose belief in karmic justice she still cherishes. Cynthia's silence during the legal battle is not indifference but an act of deliberate restraint, guided by the wisdom her daughter struggles to understand. Calvin Bain's appearance: 47, stocky, with short gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His pale blue eyes are cold, and his uniform is always perfectly pressed. After his paralysis, he is thin, hunched in his wheelchair, unshaven, with a vacant, haunted look in his eyes. Bains comes from a long line of police officers and believes in the rigid hierarchy of law and order, His racism is not overt, but rooted in deep-seated prejudice and fear. After the attack, his carefully constructed world crumbles as he finds himself paralyzed and powerless, forced to experience the humiliation he has inflicted on others. Layla Adams' appearance, 8 years old, with soft brown skin and large, curious eyes framed by short, curly hair. She is often seen wearing colorful clothing and carrying a stuffed animal, her emotional crutch. Layla is sensitive and observant beyond her years. Witnessing her grandmother's attack leaves her confused and frightened, making her wary of authority figures. Her bond with Naomi grows stronger throughout the story as Naomi realizes the importance of breaking cycles of trauma for Layla's sake. Layla's innocent outlook adds emotional depth to the novel, reminding the adults around her of the importance of compassion and resilience. Samuel Adams, in Memories and Flashbacks, appearance, a tall, thin man with smooth brown skin and a gentle smile. He often wore loose, flowing clothing and had a warm, commanding presence. Samuel was a beloved spiritual leader who preached about karmic justice and the importance of confronting hatred with love. His death years ago left a void in the Adams family, especially for Naomi, who distanced herself from his teachings. However, his influence remains throughout the novel, guiding Cynthia and eventually Naomi. Main settings: Northwood Police Department, a gray, functional building with an air of intimidation. The walls are lined with awards and plaques, a stark reminder of the culture of the thin blue line. It is here that Naomi encounters resistance from the officers who defend Bains, and where Baines's transformation begins as he finds himself ostracized by his former colleagues. Adams' family home, a modest, one-story home with a warm and inviting interior. The walls are covered with photographs of family moments, particularly portraits of Samuel and mementos of his spiritual leadership. Cynthia's wheelchair leaves tracks in the worn carpet. It is a place of comfort and memory, but also of tension, as Naomi struggles with her mother's passive approach to the case. Bane's apartment, once neat and tidy, reflecting Bane's rigid personality, the apartment slowly becomes disorganized and disheveled after his paralysis. Empty bottles of alcohol begin to accumulate, reflecting his growing despair. The apartment becomes a symbolic prison as Baines confronts his powerlessness and spirals into isolation. The courthouse, a large, imposing building with stone pillars and wooden interiors. Here, Naomi struggles with her faith in the legal system. The courthouse becomes a battleground, not just for the legal case, but for Naomi's emotional journey, where she must decide whether justice can be achieved through punishment or forgiveness. Local grocery store, a small, family-run market where the inciting incident takes place. Bright fluorescent lights and narrow hallways provide an ordinary backdrop for an extraordinary moment of violence. This setting symbolizes how racial tensions can flare up in even the most intimate spaces. The system protects its own. Present the obstacles Naomi faces in the legal system, the public backlash, and how the first cracks form in Bane's life. Filing the lawsuit, Naomi visits the district attorney's office to file charges. She is met with skepticism, as they question whether she is too emotionally invested to pursue the case. Naomi refuses to back down, insisting on filing criminal charges against Baines. The police union reacts. Baines' lawyer and police union representatives hold a press conference, portraying Baines as the real victim. Public opinion begins to divide. The backlash forces Naomi to change strategy. She turns to activists and media allies. Strange symptoms begin. Baines wakes up with numbness in his legs, but dismisses it as stress-related. He ignores it, not realizing that this is just the beginning of his physical decline. A viral battle. Naomi joins a community meeting where tensions between activists, police supporters, and city officials are high. After the meeting, Naomi realizes the importance of controlling the narrative through social media. With cracks in her armor, Baines begins to experience the consequences of her actions on multiple levels: physically, emotionally, and socially. Naomi struggles with the overwhelming pressure. Baines' legs give out. Baines collapses while trying to leave his apartment and is rushed to the emergency room. Doctors are unable to explain his sudden paralysis. Baines is forced to use a wheelchair, increasing his frustration and confusion. Naomi struggles with self-doubt that night. Naomi struggles with self-doubt. Cynthia encourages forgiveness, But Naomi feels it is too soon. Naomi redoubles her efforts, deciding to delve deeper into Bane's story. Public backlash against the Adams family protesters gather outside the Adams home, some supporting Naomi, others accusing her of ruining Bane's life. Naomi realizes that the trial will not just be a battle in court, it will be a battle for the safety of her family. The curse unfolds. Bane's life unravels as he begins to understand the gravity of what he has done. Naomi uncovers deeper corruption, isolation, and humiliation. Bane's former colleagues distance themselves, and he becomes the target of online ridicule. He becomes paranoid, believing someone has cursed him. Naomi investigates. Naomi discovers that several complaints were filed against Bains in the past, but they were quietly buried by the police union. She decides to use these buried complaints to bolster her case. Bains confronts his guilt. Haunted by nightmares of the assault, Bains begins to unravel emotionally. He has visions of Cynthia, reflecting his own helplessness. Bains realizes that he is living the life he once despised. Layla's innocence is tested. Layla's emotional arc deepens, showing how children process trauma and injustice. Layla's school troubles. Layla gets into an argument at school when a classmate repeats hateful comments about her grandmother. Naomi has a heart-to-heart with Layla about standing up for what's right without getting carried away by anger. An unexpected ally, a fellow officer, approaches Naomi in secret, providing evidence that Bains had a history of misconduct. Naomi is faced with the dilemma of whether to use the evidence, knowing that doing so will jeopardize the officer's career. Redemption or revenge? Naomi struggles with the moral implications of her struggle, while Bains hits his lowest point. Cynthia's wisdom. Cynthia tells Naomi the story of Samuel's belief in karmic justice, revealing that Bains' suffering is beyond their control. Cause. Naomi begins to reconsider what justice really means. Bains' confession. Bains, now confined to a wheelchair, confesses to a journalist that he acted out of fear and prejudice. His confession changes public opinion and pressures the prosecutor to pursue the case. The trial begins. Purpose. The trial serves as the climax of the novel, where all the emotional and narrative threads converge. Jury selection. Naomi battles with the defense to prevent biased jurors from being selected. Tensions rise on both sides, building to a brutal legal battle. Layla takes the witness stand in a pivotal moment. Layla testifies about what she saw, moving the jury with her innocence and honesty. The defense struggles to discredit Layla's testimony without appearing cruel. The verdict. The jury returns a guilty verdict, holding Bains responsible for his assault on Cynthia. The legal battle ends, but Naomi knows the emotional struggle is far from over. A different kind of justice goal. Naomi and Bains face the cost of justice and the possibility of redemption. Bains begs forgiveness. Bains, broken and remorseful, asks to meet Cynthia and Naomi in person. Cynthia accepts, but Naomi is unsure if she can forgive him. The meeting. In an emotional confrontation, Bains apologizes. Cynthia forgives him, saying, "You had to live through it to understand." Naomi remains silent, struggling with her emotions. Breaking the cycle. Objective. Naomi must decide whether to continue the cycle of hate or break free. A decision on the courthouse steps. Naomi stands outside the courthouse, in front of the press. She can either condemn Bains or call for healing. She chooses her words carefully, declaring, "Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about building something better." Moving forward. Layla and Naomi visit Samuel's grave, reflecting on his teachings. Naomi vows to raise Layla with love, not hate. The Adams family begins to heal. A new beginning. Objective. To provide closure and show how the characters have grown. Bains' new life. Bains, still in his wheelchair, works at a community center, quietly helping others. Cause. He finds meaning in his new life, humbled by his experience. A moment of peace at home. Naomi, Cynthia, and Layla sit together on the porch, watching the sunset. They are tired, but at peace. Naomi realizes that justice isn't just a moment, it's a journey, and they are finally on the right track. Cynthia Adams wheeled herself through the narrow aisles of the small grocery store, her granddaughter Layla skipping alongside her. Bright fluorescent lights flickered slightly overhead, adding to the tension that Cynthia tried to ignore. "Can I pick the cereal, Grandma?" Layla asked, her big brown eyes sparkling with hope. Cynthia smiled gently. "Just one box," she said, adjusting the colorful shawl draped over her shoulders. They made their way toward the checkout counter, Cynthia expertly balancing bags on her lap. As they reached the register, the young cashier gave them a cursory glance, her smile thin and impatient. Cynthia handed over a shopping list, asking the clerk to double-bag certain items. The cashier sighed audibly, clearly annoyed. "You're slowing down the line," she mumbled, barely hiding her frustration. Layla noticed and frowned, tugging at her grandmother's sleeve. "Why is she mad at you?" she whispered. Cynthia gave her granddaughter a reassuring pat on the hand. "Some people are just in a hurry, sweetheart." The transaction finished, but as Cynthia turned to leave, the cashier suddenly called out. "Wait, you didn't pay for this," she accused, holding up a bottle of wine Cynthia had placed under a bag by accident. Cynthia's heart raced. "I wasn't trying to steal." The cashier cut her off, her expression sharp with suspicion. "It doesn't matter. Pay for it or leave it behind." As Cynthia tried to explain, tension in the room thickened. Layla clutched her grandmother's arm, sensing the shift. At that moment, Officer Calvin Bains entered the store, drawn by the commotion. Bains was already in a foul mood. A long day of dealing with minor disputes had worn his patience thin. He spotted Cynthia, her wheelchair, her age, her skin, and immediately judged her to be trouble. "Is there a problem here?" Bains asked in a cold, clipped tone. His presence made the cashier relax, and she gestured toward Cynthia. "She won't pay for what she took," the cashier said smugly. "I made a mistake," Cynthia said evenly, trying to keep her voice calm. "I didn't see the bottle." Bains gave her a hard, assessing look, his hand resting on the radio at his hip. "I'm not going to ask you twice," he said. "Pay or get out." Layla squeezed Cynthia's arm tighter, her small face pressed against her grandmother's shoulder. Cynthia met Bain's cold gaze. "I said it was a mistake. I don't appreciate being treated this way." Bain's patience snapped. He stepped behind Cynthia's wheelchair and grabbed the handles roughly. "That's enough." Without another word, Bains wheeled Cynthia toward the exit. Cynthia resisted, gripping the armrests. "Let me go," she shouted, panic creeping into her voice. "Grandma," Layla cried, trying to pull at the officer's arm. "Step back, kid," Bains growled, pushing harder. Cynthia's heart pounded as they reached the sidewalk. In a sudden burst of fury, Bains yanked the wheelchair forward and tipped it, sending Cynthia sprawling to the ground. The world slowed for Cynthia as she hit the pavement, the sharp pain radiating through her hands and hip. Layla screamed and ran to her grandmother's side, sobbing as she tried to help her up. "Grandma, are you okay?" Cynthia's face burned with humiliation as bystanders gathered, phones held high, recording every second. "Are you crazy?" one man shouted at Bains. "She's in a wheelchair," another woman cried. Bains stood over Cynthia, his expression unchanged, as though she were an obstacle to be removed and nothing more. Far across town, Naomi Adams sat at her desk, her office cluttered with case files. The legal world was draining, and Naomi often questioned why she remained a part of it. But something inside her still held onto the belief that justice, true justice, was possible. Her phone buzzed. A message from an old friend. She opened the attachment, and her heart stopped. It was the video of her mother being thrown from her wheelchair, with Layla's terrified cries ringing out in the background. Naomi felt as though the air had been knocked from her lungs. She grabbed her coat and keys, muttering an apology to her client before storming out of the office. Rage bubbled beneath her surface. She drove with a single focus. Her mother and her daughter needed her. When Naomi arrived at the hospital, she found Cynthia lying in a bed, her face bruised but composed. Layla sat beside her, clutching Cynthia's hand like a lifeline. "Mom," Naomi whispered, rushing to her side. Cynthia gave a small, tired smile. "I'm okay, baby. Just a little sore." Naomi knelt beside Layla, brushing a curl from her daughter's face. "Are you all right, sweetie?" Layla nodded, though her wide eyes betrayed the trauma she couldn't put into words. "What happened?" Naomi asked, her voice tight. Cynthia shrugged. It got out of hand, that's all. Naomi's jaw clenched. This isn't just out of hand, Mom. That man assaulted you. Cynthia's eyes softened with sadness. I've seen worse. Naomi shook her head. No, not this time. As Naomi stepped into the hospital corridor, she saw two officers standing by the door. They gave her indifferent looks, already bracing for confrontation. I want to press charges, Naomi said, her voice sharp. The officers exchanged glances. Bains was placed on administrative leave. The investigation will follow protocol. Protocol? Naomi scoffed. He assaulted a disabled woman in front of her granddaughter. That's not protocol. The officers remained unmoved. You're too close to this case. You should let the process play out. Naomi's eyes burned with fury. She knew what that meant. Nothing would happen unless she made it happen. As Naomi drove her daughter and mother home from the hospital, the car was eerily quiet. Layla, seated in the back, finally broke the silence. Mommy, why did the police hurt Grandma? Naomi gripped the steering wheel tighter. Because some people think they're better than others, sweetheart. Are they going to hurt you, too? Layla's voice was small, but the weight of her question hit Naomi like a punch. No, baby, Naomi whispered, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. Back at the Adams family home, Cynthia sat quietly in her wheelchair, watching Naomi pace the kitchen. Mom, we need to fight this, Naomi said, her voice filled with determination. Cynthia gave a tired sigh. What good will it do? The system never changes. Naomi stopped pacing and looked at her mother, frustration and love swirling inside her. It won't change unless we make it change. She pulled out her phone and dialed a journalist friend. If the police thought they could sweep this under the rug, they were wrong. Naomi was going to make sure the whole world was watching. Naomi sat across from the district attorney, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The office reeked of stale coffee and air freshener, the hum of fluorescent lights above adding to her frustration. We've reviewed the video, the DA said, his expression a careful mask of neutrality. But these cases are complicated. The officer might argue self-defense. He thought the situation was escalating. Naomi's heart pounded. He threw my mother from her wheelchair. In front of my daughter. The DA nodded, scribbling something on a yellow notepad. I understand, Ms. Adams, but there is no but. You have all the evidence you need. Naomi interrupted, anger flaring. The video is clear. The DA leaned back in his chair. You're emotionally involved. That complicates things. Naomi's jaw tightened. No, it clarifies things. I know exactly what's at stake. The DA looked unconvinced. I'll file the charges, but just manage your expectations. These cases rarely end in convictions. Naomi stood, her voice cold. I'm not here to manage expectations. I'm here for justice. Hours later, Naomi turned on the news from her mother's living room. Cynthia sat quietly beside her, sipping tea. Layla played with her stuffed animal in the corner, oblivious to the tension building in the room. On the screen, a representative from the police union stood behind a podium. Cameras flashed as reporters jostled for position. Officer Bains acted in accordance with his training, the spokesperson said smoothly. He responded to a volatile situation to protect bystanders. We stand by him. Naomi's grip on the remote tightened as the spokesperson continued. This is a politically motivated attack on a decorated officer with an impeccable record. We will not allow his reputation to be tarnished. Cynthia glanced at Naomi, sensing the storm brewing inside her daughter. They'll twist everything, she said softly. They won't get away with this, Naomi whispered, more to herself than to her mother. Across town, Calvin Baines stared at himself in the bathroom mirror, his reflection hollow-eyed and tense. His hands trembled slightly, and he felt an odd tingling sensation spreading from his thighs to his feet. He shifted his weight uncomfortably. Just stress, he told himself. It had been a rough week, dealing with the fallout from the incident, the media frenzy, the whispers among his colleagues. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to shake off the unease crawling over him. But the tingling persisted, a subtle, irritating reminder that something wasn't right. That evening, Naomi attended a community meeting at a local church, where activists, concerned residents, and city officials gathered to discuss the growing unrest. The room buzzed with frustration. Some wanted to organize protests, while others feared further police retaliation. Naomi stood quietly in the back, absorbing the atmosphere. Finally, one of the activists spotted her. "Naomi, what's your plan? How do we win this?" All eyes turned to her. Naomi hesitated, feeling the weight of their expectations. "We need to control the narrative," she said. "The police have already started spinning the story. If we don't speak out now, the truth will get buried." A ripple of agreement spread through the room. "The court of public opinion matters just as much as the courtroom," Naomi continued. "We have to make sure people see what really happened." The next morning, Bains tried to leave his apartment for the first time in days. His legs felt heavy, as though weighed down by invisible chains. He leaned against the doorframe, breathing hard. "What the hell is wrong with me?" Ignoring the pain, he forced himself to keep moving. But halfway down the stairs, his knees buckled. His body hit the floor with a dull thud, and he lay there for a moment, stunned and humiliated. He could hear footsteps from neighbors in the hallway, but no one came to help. The weight of his own helplessness began to settle in. Back at the Adams home, Naomi scrolled through social media on her phone. The video of the incident had gone viral, but the responses were mixed. Some people expressed outrage and demanded justice. Others defended Bains, accusing Cynthia of causing trouble and calling Naomi an opportunist. Naomi's chest tightened as she read the comments. She had expected backlash, but seeing it in black and white still hurt. "Mommy?" Layla's small voice broke through Naomi's thoughts. "Yes, baby? Are they mad at us?" Layla asked, her brow furrowed with confusion. Naomi swallowed hard. "Some people are, but that doesn't mean they're right." Later that night, Naomi sat on the porch with Cynthia, the air cool and still. "You know they'll come after us," Naomi said quietly. "They'll dig up everything they can to discredit us." Cynthia nodded, her gaze steady. "They always do." Naomi exhaled sharply, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "How can you be so calm?" Cynthia smiled faintly. "I've been through worse, Naomi. The only thing that matters is what we do next." Naomi looked at her mother, the frustration easing slightly. There was a strength in Cynthia's quietness, a strength Naomi envied but didn't yet understand. The following day, Naomi returned to her office with renewed determination. She contacted every journalist, activist, and ally she knew, rallying them to her cause. The police union wanted to protect Bains. Fine. But Naomi was going to make sure the world saw the truth, every ugly, brutal second of it. As she typed out emails and made phone calls, she felt the weight of the fight ahead pressing down on her. But there was no turning back now. This was war. And Naomi Adams was ready. Calvin Baines sat on the edge of his bed, trying to shake off the numbness crawling up his legs. He gritted his teeth and stood, but his knees wobbled, giving way beneath him. He hit the floor hard, groaning in frustration. "What the hell?" Baines whispered, gripping the edge of the nightstand for support. He pulled himself back onto the bed, heart pounding, sweat breaking across his forehead. This wasn't just stress. It felt like something deeper, something wrong. He closed his eyes and willed the numbness to pass, but the tingling remained, spreading like wildfire from his toes to his thighs. His mind raced. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe something worse. Trying to keep his panic at bay, Baines reached for his phone to call a doctor. But a sharp knock at the door startled him, and the phone slipped from his grasp. Meanwhile, Naomi sat at the kitchen table in her mother's house, surrounded by piles of paperwork. Cynthia's legal case was overwhelming. Evidence, witness statements, media strategies, too much to juggle at once. Cynthia rolled into the room, her wheelchair gliding silently over the worn carpet. "You've barely slept," she said softly, watching her daughter with concern. Naomi rubbed her eyes. "I don't have time to sleep. The police union will bury this case if I stop for even a second." Cynthia's gaze lingered on Naomi. "You can't do everything, Naomi." "I have to," Naomi muttered, frustration simmering under the surface. "If I don't, who will?" Her mother sighed. "You can't save the world, and you won't save yourself by drowning in anger." Naomi bit her tongue, resisting the urge to snap. Part of her knew her mother was right, but it was too soon, too raw. Later that afternoon, Naomi's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Social media was on fire, but not in the way she had hoped. A new wave of backlash had hit. Comments ranged from calling Cynthia a fraud to accusing Naomi of exploiting the incident for attention. "They're painting me as the villain," Naomi muttered, scrolling through the venomous posts. Cynthia rolled closer, reading over Naomi's shoulder. "People will always show their true colors when they think no one's watching." Naomi's grip tightened on her phone. "I knew this would get ugly, but not this fast." Just then, a loud knock sounded from the front door. Naomi tensed. Naomi opened the door cautiously. A small group of protesters stood outside, some holding signs demanding justice, others accusing her of stirring racial tensions. "Why are you doing this, Naomi?" one of them shouted. "You're making everything worse." Naomi's heart pounded. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she closed the door slowly, resting her forehead against the cool wood. "Mommy!" Layla's small voice echoed from the hallway. Naomi turned, forcing a smile. "It's okay, baby. Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. Not even close. At his apartment, Bains sat in the dim light of his living room, his legs now fully numb. He clutched a half-empty beer bottle, bitterness settling deep into his bones. His phone buzzed on the table, a text from a fellow officer. "You're on your own, man. Can't help you this time." Bains threw the phone across the room, the glass screen shattering on impact. He had spent years serving the department, upholding the code of silence, and now they were abandoning him. He tried to stand again, but his legs betrayed him. With a growl of frustration, he slumped back into the chair, the weight of his helplessness growing heavier by the second. Determined to keep moving forward, Naomi poured herself into the investigation. She combed through old records, searching for anything that could strengthen their case against Bains. Her persistence paid off. She uncovered several complaints filed against Bains over the years, complaints that had mysteriously disappeared: misconduct, racial profiling, unnecessary force. Her heart raced. This was exactly what she needed. But just as she was about to celebrate, a thought gnawed at the back of her mind. If she used these complaints, she could jeopardize the career of the officer who secretly provided the records. Naomi sat back, chewing on her lip. What would justice really cost? That night, Bains dreamed of the incident at the grocery store. But this time, it was him lying on the pavement, helpless and humiliated, with people laughing and recording his suffering. He woke in a cold sweat, gasping for air. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, heavier than ever before. For the first time, guilt began to creep into the corners of his mind. He had convinced himself that he was just doing his job, but was that the truth? Or was he simply afraid of people like Cynthia Adams? Bains buried his face in his hands, feeling the walls of his carefully constructed world start to crumble. The next morning, Naomi stared at the files on her desk, the buried complaints, the evidence she had fought so hard to find. She knew she could win with these documents. But at what cost? Cynthia rolled into the room quietly, sensing her daughter's inner conflict. "What are you thinking, Naomi?" she asked gently. Naomi looked up, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "If I use this evidence, it could destroy the officer who helped us." Cynthia smiled sadly. "Justice isn't supposed to be easy." Naomi closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "No, it's not.